Hello everyone, Dawny Wanders here, and today I have wandered to the Shubenacadie waterway. This 114-kilometer long waterway cuts across mainland Nova Scotia, connecting Halifax Harbour with the Bay of Fundy. The waterway is made up of 7 lakes, 2 rivers, and a man-made canal. Used by the Mi'kmaq for time immemorial as a canoe route, early British settlers recognized its value. They transformed the waterway, engineering a canal that was built throughout the mid-19th century. Once complete, the canal was used for just 10 years before being put out of business by the railroads. The canal was abandoned and reclaimed by nature for over 100 years. In the 1980s, the canal was recognized as a Canadian National Historic Civil Engineering Site. Restoration is ongoing and continues to this day. Throughout this series of videos, I'll be joined by my friend, marine historian and Shubenacadie Canal volunteer, Richard MacMichael.
The canal itself is probably the most ambitious project ever undertaken in Nova Scotia during the industrial age.
We'll explore its history, the successes, and ultimate failure of the engineered canal as a shipping route, and how today it has transformed into one of the best recreational corridors in all of Canada. Welcome to the Shubenacadie Canal. I met up with Richard in downtown Dartmouth at the southern end of the waterway, where he gave me an introduction to the history of the canal.
Okay, so Shubenacadie Canal 101. The canal was first thought up as an idea to make things quicker, safer, and more efficient. To get supplies and goods from Halifax Harbour to communities on the Bay of Fundy, such as Maitland, Truro, Windsor, Parsborough, and eventually Annapolis Royal. For example, to sail from Halifax to Maitland was about 450 kilometers. The route of the canal, which followed the path of a long-standing Mi'kmaq trade route which had been going through the region for thousands of years, is only 114 kilometers. And the driving force behind the canal were 2 men, and that was Michael Wallace, and there's a small elementary school named for him out in Waverley, and more importantly, judge and politician Charles Rufus Fairbanks. And Fairbanks is the person that hires Francis Hall to be the chief engineer. They have a survey of what everything is going to comprise. Hall's estimate is $1.7 million in today's funds. Which was, as I say, a very impressive undertaking for the age. And when completed, the 114 kilometers of the canal will comprise 9 locks, 2 large holding reservoirs, and 2 marine railways, including this one.
The biggest challenge the canal builders faced was moving vessels between Halifax Harbour, down here, and the Dartmouth Lakes up here, about 1 kilometer away. There was a small stream called the Sawmill River that connected the two, but it wasn't suitable for passage. The original plan was to construct 5 locks that would empty and fill with water as needed, similar to how canals work today. That plan was too expensive and bankrupted the canal company. When a new canal company was formed a few decades later, those partially constructed locks were abandoned in place and a marine railway was constructed instead. You can still see here where the tracks of the marine railway led to Halifax Harbour. Here's Richard to explain how the marine railway worked.
So we're at the site of the Shubenacadie Canal Marine Railway, and this was begun around 1854, and it took advantage of the fact that there was already a large holding pond, a reservoir, farther up the slope, and that is today what we call Sullivans Pond. In order to have a reservoir to power the lower locks that were originally planned here, a team of engineers led by Mr. Sullivan dammed off a section of the Sawmill River which meandered its way from Lake Banook down to Dartmouth Cove. And they did some dredging. When the dam was removed, they basically created Sullivan's Pond. And so now, from Dartmouth Cove to the pond, you only have a parcel of land that's 500 meters. But the elevation change from Portland Street to the pond is 16.75 meters from top to bottom. Instead of building the locks here, which were incredibly expensive, they go with what they had at the Morris Canal, which is a marine railway. And so railway line is laid from Dartmouth Cove all the way up into Sullivan's Pond. There's a bespoke cradle which sits on the railway line, and this is where the barge is loaded on. And when the barge is loaded onto the cradleman waves a flag. It's seen by the gentleman on the second floor of the Flume house who walks out onto the back deck. He waves his flag and opens up the sluice gate at this end of the Flume. The corresponding sluice gate at Sullivans Pond is opened up, and water comes tearing along the Flume into the Flume house. When the water reaches the second floor of the building, it plunges 14 meters down a shaft that's only 1.5 meters in circumference. So you have a lot of water being compressed into a narrow space. And the water comes up underneath of the building, and it interacts with a horizontal turbine. The water actually comes through the four spouts on the turbine. The turbine works gears. As the gears turn, the huge cable drum turns, and the barge and the cradle are drawn up the rail line from the cove into the pond, and the whole process only takes 3 or 4 minutes. So you could walk basically alongside the cradle as it was being drawn up the slope. And if you consider how long it would take to fill and then drain each of the locks along here, you could see just how important a development this is in the history of the canal.
If you would like to see the Flume House, check the Shubenacadie Canal website to schedule your visit. Lucky for me, Richard invited me in for a private tour. So this is the turbine chamber.
This is the original turbine chamber from the mid-1800s, and it's an incredible part of Nova Scotia's industrial heritage. The outer walls of the chamber are the original walls of Lock 3, which was never completed but begun in 1826. And the chamber itself is made out of granite blocks. It's vaulted, which is why it has its amazing acoustics. And what's in the turbine chamber today is a replica of the turbine that would have been in here. And the turbine is a great example of just what a cooperative venture Star Park is. So the turbine was designed and fabricated by students from the Nova Scotia Community College. Atlantic's Creative Works created all the amazing gears that would have been here. A couple of retired civil engineers designed the building, and the blueprints were based on the existing blueprints for the Morris Canals Flume House, and also some period photography. The replica of the cradle, which we'll have a look at in a little while, was created by CBCL Engineering, the HRM, Sandy Engineering, and Martin Development. And the Flume House is completely bespoke. There's no other building like this anywhere in North America, and with the exception of the nails in the deck, the entire building is built using traditional mid-1800s building technologies.
Next up, we headed back outside to have a close-up look at the barge's cradle.
All right, well, this is the replica of the cradle that would have run up the slope from Dartmouth Cove into Sullivans Pond. Great cooperative venture. The HRM, CBCL, Sandy Engineering, and Martin Development all had a hand in bringing this to life. And it gives you a really good idea of how the cable was set up on the slope. And the cable that attached at either end to the cradle was actually attached on the most interior section of the cradle where the gears are. And the whole thing sort of came up the slope seamlessly. It took about 3 or 4 minutes to come up from the cove into the pond. You could essentially walk alongside it, talking to the chap that was on the cradle. He had a little cabin up there, and he most importantly had access to a handbrake. And the handbrake, which is right here, allowed him to manually stop the cradle if the cable snapped. If the cable did snap, you've got about 100 tons of cradle plus whatever on the barge, making a rapid return to Halifax Harbor, and so that came in very handy. It was either stay at your post and pull the handbrake, or jump for it and then try to explain why you had jumped for it instead of saving the day. So the cradle here gives you a really wonderful idea of the site in operation, and even more importantly, along with the trail and the railway line, which were donated by Canadian Pacific, it gives you a wonderful idea of the whole visual sight line of the railway as it ran up the slope. So having this here really adds to the overall effect of the canal in operation. And just a short walk up the slope from the cradle, you find Sullivans Pond.
Running alongside the site of the Marine Railway is a section of the Sawmill River that had been buried in underground culverts for about 150 years. It was daylighted just a couple of years ago and is now a lovely feature of this park. So that's what the Sawmill River looks like today. This whole structure was just redone in the last couple of years. It had been completely underground, totally channelized into culverts, and now, as you can see, it's been turned into quite a large fish ladder. The reason that it's been turned into a fish ladder is because the goal here is to have fish be able to traverse from Halifax Harbour up into the Shubenacadie Canal system without having too much struggle. So the way that a fish ladder works is you put in all these steps, and then between each step, as fish try to migrate up the river, they have a chance to rest in these pools that are created by the steps. I've reached the top of the walking path portion of the Marine Railway, and at this point we are super close to Sullivans Pond. But as you can see here, the path, I mean, there's kind of this like dirt path that cuts across to the parking lot of a gas station. But this is like, we're basically following the trail of the Marine Railway right now, even though we are now just walking through a parking lot. And this park across the street that we're approaching, this is where Sullivans Pond is.
Well, the most interesting thing about Sullivans Pond is this is man-made. As I mentioned, they needed a large reservoir to power the turbine at the Flume house. And so the Sawmill River meandered its way from here down to Dartmouth Cove. And in fact, where the two culverts are up at Hawthorne Street is essentially where the river ran. And they dammed off a section of the river. The team of Irish engineers led by Mr. Sullivan did a whole bunch of dredging. The dams were removed and it created Sullivans Pond. And so it flows from where the culvert is down to this area, which is where the Sawmill River has been once again daylighted and fish laddered on its way down to Dartmouth Cove. Some other interesting things in the pond include this man-made island. So you have a man-made pond with a man-made island, and that, along with the totem pole, was created when Halifax and Dartmouth hosted the Canada Summer Games back in 1969.
Sullivans Pond is where the Shubenacadie Canal starts properly, or when I say properly, the canal portion of it, so the portion above the Marine Railway. The Marine Railway would have deposited the Cradle and the barge here at the downstream end of Sullivans Pond. Now, once the barge was in the water, a boat would have latched onto the barge and started towing it up Sullivans Pond into the next lake above it, which is now known as Lake Bannock. They would have cruised up between those two big stone cairns. Those cairns that are at the end of Sullivans Pond, they're markers. They kind of look like what would have been used as the abutments for a bridge, or the like the remnants of a bridge that used to be here, but in fact that was never a bridge. Those are markers to guide Avery and the barge, or any other ship using the canal, into the proper deep enough channel to make their way up to Lake Bannock. I've made it to the upstream end of Sullivans Pond, and just over my shoulder across that street is Lock 1 of the Shubenacadie Canal, and I can't wait to show you, but you are going to have to wait because I'm going to wrap up this video and you'll see that in the next video. If you're enjoying this series, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to my channel, and I would like to thank Richard MacMichael for joining me in this series and this one, and you'll see him coming up in the next several videos about the Shubenacadie waterway as well. So, thank you for watching, and Dawny Wanders, we'll see you in the next one.